Hello, good morning to everyone. Ang topic natin for this week is the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research. This topic is very crucial para sa inyong final project for next year. You have to master the difference between a quantitative research and a qualitative research. Again, yung word for the day natin or the word for the past weeks is about research, di ba? Let's review anong ibig sabihin ng research. Research is a process where we want to establish truth. We want to discover truth. Kung meron tayong isang katotohanan na gustong malaman, one way to do it, one way to get the truth is to do research. But in the field of social sciences, specifically in psychology, research can be divided into two categories. Meron tayong tinatawag na quantitative research, merong tinatawag na qualitative research. And again, for today, we are going to master the difference between those two researches. And my approach in explaining to you the difference between quantitative and qualitative research is historical. Para malaman natin yung pagkakaiba ng quali and quanti, alamin natin, intindihin natin saan ba sila nanggagaling. Okay? So we are going to have a short lecture on the history of qualitative research and quantitative research. Once upon a time, very long time ago, wala pang term na psychology. Hindi pa naiimbento yung term na psychology, therefore, wala pang psychologist. During those times, kapag ikaw ay isang tao na interesado ka sa pag-aaral ng human mind, ang tawag sa'yo, philosopher. So those people who are so interested in studying the human mind, they are called philosophers. So we can say that once upon a time, psychology was under philosophy. Parang ano siya, no? It is a specialty of philosophy. But there is no specific term that refer to people who study the human mind. It's just that kapag gusto mong pag-aralan yung human mind, philosophers handle that topic. Now, during those times, what about the human mind do philosophers would like to study? Usong-uso yung topic noon na dualism, the relationship between the mind and the body. Basically, dualism is a philosophical idea saying that human beings like us, meron daw tayong two dimensions. We have a physical dimension, that's our body, and we also have a non-physical dimension, that is our mind. So pinag-aaralan ng mga philosophers during those times, what is the relationship between the body and the mind? How does the body affect the mind? And how does the mind affect the body? During those times, ang isa sa pinaka-expert dyan, si René Descartes. We can consider Descartes to be the subject matter expert for this issue, the relationship between the body and the mind. Okay? So again, during those times, itong issue na ito, the relationship between the body and the mind, it is being handled by the philosophers. Now, during those times, how do philosophers study dualism? Gumagamit sila ng introspection. Basically, introspection, ito yung parang method nila in discovering truth. If scientists use the scientific method, philosophers use introspection, answering a question through self-reflection or dialogue. So during those times, kapag philosopher ka and you have a question and you want to find the answer to that question, all you need to do is to find a quiet place, uupo ka, tapos mag-iisip ka ng malalim. All throughout the day, buong araw mong pag-iisipan yung sagot sa tanong mo hanggang sa malaman mo yung sagot sa tanong mo, then you have done introspection. That is why if you can see on the screen, yan yung official symbol ng philosophy, no? The thinking man or the rational man, because this reflects their method in answering philosophical questions. Meron pang isang method, no, other than self-reflection, ito yung tinatawag nating dialogue. In a dialogue, hindi lang ikaw yung mag-isa na mag-iisip, no? In a dialogue, meron kang kausap. So that person that you are talking with will help you to to come up with an answer to your question. So in 'di ba sa dialogue nagkakaroon ng pag-uusap, and the goal of that conversation is to come up with an answer to a specific question. In fact, yan nga yung naging dahilan kung bakit nagkaroon ng Socratic method. As you're familiar with the Socratic method, 'di ba? Ang ginagawa diyan, tanong at sagot. Somebody asks a question and then somebody answers. The person who answered will ask another question, and the person who once asked a question will now answer that question hanggang sa makakome up sila ng sagot doon sa tanong na pinag-uusapan nila. That's what you mean by Socratic method. The foundation of Socratic method is the method of introspection. Again, in introspection, it's all about what do you think. You are relying on the power of your thinking to give you answers to your question. Sabi nga ni Socrates, I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. 'Di ba? Yung I can only make them think, that is the process where you can come up with an answer to a question. The more you think, the nearer you become, or the nearer you are to your answer. So if you were a philosopher during those times, in fact even today, method pa rin ng mga philosophers yan, no? Kung meron kang tanong at gusto mo ng sagot, anong gagawin mo? You just keep thinking about it, or you dialogue with a person. Now, fast forward in modern day psychological research, this is the foundation of qualitative research. Okay? Ano bang ibig sabihin ng qualitative research? This is a good definition of qualitative research. Just focus on the words in box. Ano yung mga keywords? Pag qualitative research, we interpret phenomena. In our field, in psychology, we interpret psychological phenomenon. What do? We use the collection of variety of material such as case study, personal experiences, introspective, life story, interview, observational, historical, interactional, visual text. Yan yung mga kinokolekta natin in qualitative research. And the main goal of qualitative research doon sa last box, because we want to understand the meaning of individual lives. Gusto natin makita yung kahulugan ng buhay in the eyes of a person. So if that is your goal, if that is your method, then you are going to do qualitative research. Ano ba yung mga methods of research under the qualitative method? We have the following. You can do interview, focus group discussion, ethnography, narrative research, phenomenology. All of these methods are being or are under the qualitative research. But for our purposes in the undergraduate level, hindi natin ito makukuha lahat. Okay, in fact, if you want to really master each of these methods, this is being taught in the master's level. So kung gusto mong matuto ng narrative research, for example, mag-enroll ka sa master's program in psychology, because that is the only place where you will be taught how to extensively apply qualitative methods. But for our purposes, very general lang tayo, no? In fact, ang maituturo ko lang sa inyo would be interview or focus group discussion. Ethnography, narrative research, phenomenology, very advanced. Anyway, going back to the history that we are talking about, introspection as a method of answering question is very powerful. In fact, it was so powerful na ito yung naging foundation of the following fields of knowledge: philosophy, religion, mathematics, and law. So itong mga fields of knowledge na ito, how do they come up with answers to their questions? By using introspection as a method. Now, merong itong historical implication sa ating field, no? So I hope by this time you understand that the implication of this is, once upon a time, psychology was under philosophy. Again, during those times, wala pang term na psychology. Ang tawag sa atin, philosophy pa rin, kasi nga, we are not an independent field. We are just a specialty under philosophy. So, that's the historical implication that I would like you to learn about our field. Nung unang panahon, under tayo sa philosophy. Now, let's continue the story of what I'm talking about. During those times, merong isang field na talagang sumisikat. Kung baga, in our language today, we can say this field is trending. A lot of students want to be physics major. A lot of professionals are becoming popular because they are studying physics. Ano ba yung physics? In physics, we study physical laws of the earth. Ano ba yung mga pinag-aaralan sa physics? Motion, gravity, friction, atoms. Now, where do they study this? Where do they study? Physicists study these things inside the laboratory. And how do they study these things? They use the scientific method. Specifically, experiment. 'Di ba? So dito pa lang, ibang-iba na yung method between philosophy and physics. In physics, again, they are very dedicated to the steps of science. They start with the theory, and then they come up with the hypothesis, and then they will experiment, and then they will analyze the data, and then they will refine the theory, run the experiment again, hanggang sa ma-perfect nila yung theory. That is the scientific method, hardcore. Diba? Again, this is very different from introspection. In introspection, you don't need the theory. You don't need prediction. You don't need experiment. All you need to do is to think about possible answers to your question. So, ibang-iba yung physics sa philosophy. And one more thing that you have to remember about physics, it is a very quantitative field. Kung meron kang kaibigan na nag-aaral sa Lasal at siya ay isang physics major, I'm sure that friend of yours more or less is good with math. In fact, kung physics major ka, hindi ka dapat takot sa numbers because in physics, you are going to deal a lot about numbers. Diba? Puro computations yan because almost everything that physicists say, it is backed up by numbers. Lahat ng knowledge sa physics, merong backup yan ng numbers. It is a very quantitative field. Now, let's continue the story. There was this one philosopher by the name of Wilhelm Wundt, or in some translations, Wilhelm Wundt. Okay? Whatever. But this guy, who is a philosopher, interesado din siya sa human mind. Okay, so he is a philosopher studying the human mind. He was so inspired by the field of physics. So sabi niya, bakit hindi natin gayahin yung approach ng physics? Diba? In what way? If physics can study law, the physical laws in the laboratory, why don't we study the human mind also in the laboratory? So yan yung gusto niyang mangyari. Kumbaga, he wanted to make physics as a template for a new version of psychology. Let's study the laws of the human mind inside the laboratory. Take note, kinuha lang niya yan sa physics. Physics study physical laws inside the laboratory. Translate to psychology. Translate to the human mind. Let's study the human mind inside the laboratory. That's what Wundt wants to happen. Gayahin yung approach ng mga physicists. And so, because of this inspiration that he got from the field of physics, nagkaroon tayo ngayon ng movement towards positivism. Remember, ang ibig sabihin ng positivism, this is a very heavy term, but to make it simple, positivism is a philosophical way, or it is a way of looking at the world. In positivism, naniniwala tayo na yung mga realities na nakikita natin must be backed up by observable numbers. Kinakailangan lagi tayong merong back-up na data. We will not believe something is true until we see the data that proves that reality to be true. Diba? Now, the field of physics is following positivism. Ganyan yung approach ng physics, ganyan yung philosophical understanding ng mga physicists. I won't believe something is true until I see the numbers that it is true. And Wilhelm Wundt wants psychology to also follow this positivistic worldview. Kaya naman sa kanyang kagustuhan na ang psychology ay mahalintulad or to adopt positivism, he created or he started the first psychological laboratory in 1879. Again, ginagamit ko lang yung term na psychology dito, but during this time, hindi pa ganun kasikat yung term na psychology. It is still under philosophy. But technically speaking, The establishment of the first psychological laboratory in 1879, specifically in Leipzig, Germany, was the official birth of experimental psychology. So sa mga estudyante na mukhang nahihirapan sa experimental psychology, this is the year where that subject was born. Kasalanan ito ni Wilhelm Wundt. Kaya nagkaroon ng experimental psychology. Kasi nagtatag siya ng laboratory where we can study the human mind. And you know what? This had an impact in our field. When finally we were able to establish a laboratory where we studied the human mind, how did this impact our field? For the first time in our history, psychology became an independent field from philosophy. Remember a while ago I told you we were under philosophy. But since we are now doing something different compared to the philosophers, such as having a laboratory, kinakailangan meron na tayong sariling identity. 'Di ba? Psychologists are not philosophers. In fact, dito na nagsimula sumikat yung term na psychology. Because of the establishment of the laboratory, slowly, the word psychology emerged. It is the scientific study of the human mind. The fact that we have a laboratory, and this is where we study the human mind, just how physicists do it, then that proves that we are a scientific field. Kasi nga, ginagawa natin yung technique na ginagawa ng mga physicists. And if physicists are hardcore scientists, so is psychologists. Kaya nagkaroon na tayo ng definition of psychology being the scientific study of the human mind. And one more thing, in studying the mind in the laboratory, this required psychologists to master statistics. Kasi nga positivistic na 'di ba? Almost everything that we need to say, that we are saying, must be backed up by numbers. And these numbers in psychology, it means statistics. For those of you who hate statistics, nahihirapan kayo sa statistics, inferential statistics, descriptive statistics, kasalanan na naman ito ni Wilhelm Wundt. Because of the movement that he started, kinailangan na ng mga psychologists ng bagong skill. The skill of dealing with numbers, the skill of organizing numbers and interpreting these numbers, nagkaroon na ng statistics for psychology. Or, to make the long story short, this is now the birth of the quantitative method in doing research in psychology. So, anong pinagkaiba ng quantitative sa qualitative? Again, let's study the keywords. Keywords for quantitative: measured, numbers, statistical techniques, numerical data. Whenever you hear those numbers, that's quantitative research. So kapag gagawa ka ng quantitative research, what should you expect? Expect measurements, expect surveys, expect mastering statistics. Because that's what it means to do research quantitatively. You are dealing with numbers. You are going to establish a truth. You are going to discover a truth using the power of numbers. So what happened now? Nung naging positivistic na yung psychology, marami pa ring mga psychologists are not so used with the positivistic approach. Hirap pa rin silang mag-quantitative research. 'Di ba sabi nga, doing introspection or doing psychology qualitatively is a hard habit to break. There were still a lot of psychologists during those times, even if they have a laboratory, they still do qualitative research inside the laboratory. So marami mga psychologists during those times, hindi pa rin sila comfortable with the idea of quantifying the human mind. Pero ito na nga naging problema, A lot of people during those times, they saw the problem of introspection, especially those psychologists who are pushing for statistics, So sabi nila, kinakailangan na nating ihinto yung introspection because it is destroying our field. In what way is introspection destroying the field? Nagiging biktima yung psychology ng subjectivity. What do you mean by subjectivity, or from the root word subjective? It means you don't come up with common answer. You ask a question, but since everyone in that field is subjective because they are introspecting, nag-iiba-iba tuloy yung sagot nila sa iisang tanong. And usually, those answers that they give to the questions are contradicting each other. And you know what? That is bad for a field claiming to be a science. Sa science kasi dapat eksakto. Sa isang tanong, isang sagot lang dapat ang meron. But since everyone in psychology, or majority in psychology, are still introspecting, a lot of the knowledge that we are producing in the field are very subjective. Different answers for common questions. Let me give you a very simple example. Halimbawa, tanungin ko kayo ng isang tanong, sino ang pinaka-cute na Pokemon? Sino ang pinaka-cute na pocket monster? Tapos lahat tayo mag-introspect lang. Hanap tayo ng upuan, let's go to a quiet place and think. Think hard. Who is the cutest Pokemon? Guess what? Wala tayo magiging common na sagot. Some people would say, this Pokemon. Some people would say, that Pokemon is the cutest, because everyone was just introspecting. Or, this also applies to more serious questions in life. Let's say, ano ba ang pinaka-logical na religion? Ano ba yung religion na pinaka nagme-make sense na paniwalaan? Oh, and then let's just introspect. I'm sure not everyone will have a common answer. We will have different answers. Yung iba sasabihin Christianity, yung iba Islam, yung iba Buddhism. Wala tayong common na sagot because everyone is just introspecting. And the product of introspection is again subjectivity. And you know what? This really had a bad effect in psychology as a field. Because na-experience nga to sa field natin, no? Because everyone is introspecting in psychology, walang common answers yung mga psychologists to psychological questions. One good example of this would be the Psychoanalytic Society. If you have taken your theories of personality, di ba, when you say the Psychoanalytic Society, these are the psychologists who believe in the unconscious. The reason why we are doing certain things, certain behaviors every day is because of the unconscious forces found in our unconscious. 'Di ba nagpasimula niyan si Sigmund Freud, tapos dumami yung mga disciples niya, 'di ba? Alam niyo ba, the reason why Sigmund Freud came up with the idea of the unconscious was because of qualitative research. Introspection ang gamit niya, qualitative method. Specifically, case study. He collected all the cases of his patients. Okay? Hinanap niya yung mga commonality doon sa mga anecdotes, sa mga kwento, sa mga case study ng patients niya, and then from there, nabuo niya yung kanyang psychodynamic theory. At first, many other professionals believe him. Kaya nga nagkaroon sila ng Psychoanalytic Society. What do they have in common? They all believe in the existence of the unconscious. Remember the iceberg? Yung pinakamalaking part sa ilalim, that's the unconscious. Si Sigmund Freud nagpasimula niyan. Qualitative research ang ginamit niya. But, since the Psychoanalytic Society is into qualitative research, again, marami silang mga ideas about the unconscious that are contradicting each other. Very subjective. In fact, that's the reason why Sigmund Freud, at the later part of his career, mainit ang ulo niya sa mga kasama niya. Because a lot of the members in the Psychoanalytic Society don't agree with him. Because they have a different view of the unconscious. At isa na nga dyan, si Carl Jung. Diba? If you have taken your theories of personality, you learned that once upon a time, Freud and Jung were very close. In fact, Sigmund Freud is grooming Carl Jung to be the next leader of the Psychoanalytic Society. But what happened? Carl Jung had different views about the unconscious. Diba? Hindi siya naniniwala na ang unconscious puro lang sexual energies. Pero yun nga yung paniniwala ni Freud. The unconscious is fueled by sexual energies. But Carl Jung disagrees. So what happened? They parted ways. Hindi sila nagkasundo. Nagkagalit sila ni Sigmund Freud. You see, that's what happens when people still introspect in the field of science. dumadami yung mga hindi pagkakaunawaan, and that is not good for a field claiming to be a science. In fact, another negative effect of introspection in the field of psychology was, again, people realized that psychologists are not really scientists. Nagsusuot lang tayo ng gown, ng laboratory gown inside the laboratory, but if you study how psychologists establish truths about the human mind, they are still acting like philosophers. Kaya marami mga tao, sabi nila, alam nyo, ang mga psychologists na yan, hindi naman talaga sila scientists eh. They are just philosophers wearing a laboratory gown. In fact, meron tayong natanggap na label from these people na napakasakit. We were called a pseudoscience. Pseudo means pretending to be, not true, fake, class A, not original. Can you imagine, you're a psychologist, tapos ang tawag sa psychology, pseudoscience, nagpapanggap na science na hindi naman. Again, where is this coming from? From the fact that we are not doing the methods of science, that we are still introspecting. That's why, as a response to this criticism against psychology, there were a group of psychologists who fought back. Hindi sila pumayag na tawagin yung psychology na pseudoscience. At sino itong mga to? Ivan Pavlov, John Watson, B.F. Skinner, the founders of behaviorism. Diba? Let's have a quick review. Ano bang sinasabi ng behaviorism? Behaviorism believes that we need to study human behaviors. We need to study the observable aspects of a human being, which is behavior. Hindi sila naniniwala sa unconscious. Hindi sila naniniwala sa dream interpretations, sa mga archetypes. Let's study what is observable. Why is a person aggressive? Bakit umiiyak yung bata? Bakit nagiging addict ang isang tao? You see? So, we focus on behaviors. Yan yung pinag-aaralan sa behaviorism. Kaya nga siya tinawag na behaviorism. We don't talk about mind things. We talk about behaviors. Number 2, behaviorism also believes in the power of external forces in shaping the mind. Diba? Naniniwala sila na yung reason bakit ka ganyan has something to do with certain forces from the environment, such as rewards and punishment. Hindi sila naniniwala sa psychic energies. Hindi sila naniniwala sa id, ego, and superego. Hindi sila naniniwala sa mga archetypes, which are very psychoanalytical terms. Behaviorism believes in the power of the environment, external environment, in shaping who you are as a person. So, bakit ka aggressive? Bakit ka iyakin? May kinalaman yan sa environment. Baka kasi kaya ka iyakin, nare-reinforce yung pagkamaiyakin mo. Bakit ka aggressive? Kasi yung mga TV shows na pinapanood mo, puro nag-e-express ng aggression. You see, that's how behaviorists would analyze human behaviors. And lastly, and I think most importantly, behaviorism is a very strong believer in the power of experimentation. Yan talaga yung kanilang flagship. They want psychology to stop introspecting and instead do experiments. Ipagpatuloy natin o gayahin yung ginagawa ng mga physicists. If physicists do their thing using experiment and we like to be like them, then we need to study the human mind again using experiment. In fact, yan nga yung unang sinabi sa official document na nilabas ng mga behaviorists, written by John Watson himself, Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It. What did he say? Psychology as the behaviorist views it is a purely objective experimental branch of natural science. Experimental branch. If you are a behaviorist, if you are a psychologist, you need to stop introspecting and you need to answer psychological questions using experiments. Kaya naman, ang naging mission ng behaviorism is to re-establish psychology as what? As a hard science. Gusto nila na yung psychology maibalik ulit doon sa rank of natural sciences. We are not philosophers. We are scientists. So, behaviorism wanted psychology to be within the ranks of physics, biology, and chemistry. Physics, biology, and chemistry kasi during those times are considered the hard sciences. And behaviorists believe that psychology is one of the hard sciences. They wanted psychology to be more quantitative. Ayaw na nilang nag-i-introspect yung mga psychologists. And that's why they recommended two things to do. If you are a psychologist, number one, palitan mo na yung focus ng research mo. Stop talking about dreams. Stop talking about the unconscious. Rather, i-focus mo yung research mo sa behaviors. Diba? Change in focus. Ang pag-aralan mo na lang aggression. Ang pag-aralan mo na lang addiction. Ang pag-aralan mo na lang human relationships. Because these things are the observable aspects of a person. Number two, another recommendation they made, palitan na rin natin yung method natin. Itigil na natin yung pag-i-introspect. Rather, we need to do more experiments. Let's not say something about how the mind works without experimenting about it. And this effort that these behaviorists gave was very successful. Naiangat nila yung psychology to be, again, a natural science. And these are the indications that they were successful in their efforts. Number one, psychology was now called the new science. Nung sumikat na yung behaviorism, nung sumikat na yung pag-experiment in the laboratory about the human mind, many people, again, respected psychology to be a natural science. In fact, it was called the new science. Malaking improvement yan. Dati ang tawag sa atin, pseudoscience, ngayon, new science na. Number two, another indication of success, psychology was now offered in big-time universities as a degree. University of Chicago, Harvard, and Yale. And these degrees, these programs in psychology are offered under the College of Sciences. Diba? Oo. Kasi nga, science na talaga ang psychology. Number three, the last indication that behaviorism was successful is dumami yung psychology laboratories both inside and outside universities. Okay? Again, in fact, this subject that we have, experimental psychology laboratory version or laboratory component, this is the legacy of behaviorism. Kaya ako masasabi ko, yung subject na experimental psychology, both the lecture and the lab, is a quote-unquote baby of behaviorism. This subject is born out of the efforts of behaviorists. Now, what explains why behaviorism was so successful in their presentation of psychology? There are two reasons. Bakit nirespeto yung mga behaviorists? Number one, because people saw that psychology is a very relevant field. Marami siyang mga social problems na nasusolusyonan. When psychology does research using the behaviorist way or using the quantitative way, nagiging useful yung psychology. How to make school children more behave. What is the best parenting style that I can use para lumaki ng maayos yung anak ko? Right? In business, how do you make or how do you market products para mag-increase yung sales? In fact, in the field of business, if you have heard the subject consumer behavior, that subject was just borrowed from psychology. 'Di ba? Sa consumer behavior, ang mga pine-present diyan mga psychological studies when it comes to how people buy things. Tuwing kailan siya naglalabas ng pera, tuwing kailan siya nagtitipid. Paano ba dapat yung commercial mo para bilhin ng mga tao yung product? That's consumer behavior. And a lot of the ideas being taught in consumer behavior are first discovered in the field of psychology. So psychology was very relevant when it is quantitative. Number two, another reason why behaviorism was very successful is because it is more convincing. Kapag ang isang behaviorist kasi nagsabi ng isang statement about the human mind, it is usually backed up by objective data. And what do I mean by objective data? I mean numbers. I mean statistics. 'Di ba? I mean kahit ikaw naman it is more convincing for us to believe something that is backed up by numbers compared to it is only backed up by anecdotes. Sa qualitative research kasi yun ang weakness 'Di ba? Bakit totoo ang isang bagay? Kasi sabi ni ganito, sabi niyang ganyan. Anecdotes based on what they said, based on what they experienced. But in behaviorism, in quantitative research, kapag nagsabi tayo ng isang bagay, why is that statement true? Because this statement that I've mentioned is backed up by numbers. Halimbawa, sabihin ko sa inyo, do you know, when kids are exposed to aggressive models, they become more aggressive. Oh, what will convince you that that is true? Numbers. Papakitaan ngayon kita ng mga statistics coming from the laboratory showing that kids who are exposed to a violent model indeed are more aggressive compared to kids who were not exposed to a violent model. 'Di ba? There is something about numbers that we trust truths that is backed up by data, backed up by numbers. And again, this is quantitative method. 'Di ba? We are very deductive, we are objective, the results or the conclusions are very generalizable, things are backed up by numbers. At ano ang tumutulong sa atin to come up with these ideas? Statistics. Kaya nga again, for those of you who hate statistics, kasalanan ito ng behaviorism, kaya tayo nagkaroon ng statistics. Because we are doing experiments in the laboratory, we need to master the skill of statistics because that's how you analyze data in the laboratory. You use statistics. And I think that's also the reason why ang statistics in our flowchart is a prerequisite before you can take experimental psychology. Tama ba? Correct me if I'm wrong. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-experimental psych nang hindi mo na ipapasa ang SISTA 1 at SISTA 2. Because by the time you enter experimental psych, by the time you enter experimental psych laboratory, you are expected to have already mastered statistics. In fact, ako, yan ang assumption ko sa inyo, no? Na more or less, alam nyo ang ANOVA. Alam nyo ang pinagkaiba ng one-way ANOVA sa two-way ANOVA. Alam nyo ang ibig sabihin ng t-test. Ano pinagkaiba ng t-test dependent sa t-test independent? See, these things are very important because if you don't master these quantitative skills, hindi ka makaka-generate ng conclusion inside the laboratory. Okay? Case in point. Gusto ko lang ipasay sa iyo si C.F. Skinner. Very well psychologist in our field, no? Siya yung nagpuso ng operant conditioning theory. B.F. Skinner basically said that everything we do is a result of reward and punishment. Result of the consequences that we get after an action. Alam nyo ba, yung mga sinabi niya about operant conditioning theory was based on his researches in the laboratory on pigeons. And he was very quantitative about that. Everything he said about how reinforcement works, about how punishment works, it's based on quantitative research. B.F. Skinner was a very quantitative guy. Okay? So again, in summary, ano pinagkaiba ng quantitative research sa qualitative research? The following. Quantitative research, keywords are the following: structured data, statistical analysis, objective conclusions, you use surveys and experiments. Pag qualitative research naman, unstructured yung data, summary lang, subjective conclusions, interviews, focus group discussions, and observations. But I like this slide better. Anong pinagkaiba ng quantitative sa qualitative research? Again, in quantitative research, we look at the patterns in numeric data. Keyword pattern. What else? We gather data in numerical form. Usually in presenting data from quantitative research, we use a lot of graphs and tables. Kaya sa mga journal articles, 'di ba? Doon 'yan sa sa result section. Kapag nakakita ka ng mga graphs and tables, then most likely that is a quantitative research. On the other hand, qualitative research, keywords are the following: gathers information that is hindi siya numerical in form. Typically descriptive ang data, and usually we focus on the quality. We ask deep questions. We look at describing a psychological phenomenon. Magkaiba ang quantitative sa qualitative research. To further differentiate the two, listen to how they talk. Diba? Paano mag-report ng conclusion ng isang quantitative research? Read this one. Survey results show that 78% of families in Happyville feel they do not have the means to generate the income to meet their desires. Statistics show that Happyville median household incomes are $20,000 lower than their neighboring town, Richville. That is a very quantitative statement, diba? Pero pakinggan mo kapag nagsalita ang qualitative research. Qualitative research talks this way. Family in Happyville use alternate economies, which sometimes include drugs and violence, to gain respect and fulfill their desires generated through contact with the mainstream economy, which they do not have access to. Diba? Hindi ka nakarinig ng mga numbers. In qualitative research, ang ginawa mo dyan, you explained something. You try to describe the life of people in Happyville. Qualitative, different from quantitative. Another simple illustration. Difference between quantitative and qualitative. Halimbawa, pag-aaralan natin yung pagkain ng ice cream. The way quantitative research will study ice cream will be so different to how qualitative research will study ice cream. For example, quantitative. Only 1 in 30 take the free ice cream. And then from there, you will come up with a theory. Diba? Merong libreng ice cream dyan, walang nagbabantay. Merong 30 tao na dumaan, isa lang ang kumuha. That's quantitative research. Binilang mo, out of 30, ilan ang kumuha ng free ice cream. But in qualitative research, the question is different. Ano ang gagawin mo sa qualitative research? You are going to dig deeper to the experience of eating the ice cream. Or you are going to dig deeper in getting the ice cream. Aalamin mo yung reason bakit niya kinuha yung ice cream. What did you feel when you saw the free ice cream? Sabi nung kausap mo, excited and little scared. And why was that? Saan nanggagaling yung excitement mo? Saan nanggagaling yung takot mo nung kinuha mo yung free ice cream? You see the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research. Another example, using the psychology of infidelity. If you are going to study infidelity, why people cheat in relationships, using quantitative research and qualitative research, magkaiba na naman sila ng mga questions that they will ask about cheating. Halimbawa, in quantitative, this is a very quantitative question. Is it true that partners' income level, marital satisfaction, and availability of mate alternatives predict cheating behaviors in relationships? That's a very quantitative question. Specifically, gagamit ka dito ng multiple regression eh. 'Di ba? Gusto mong malaman kung alin ba dito sa tatlo, income level, marital satisfaction, and availability of alternatives, alin doon sa tatlo yung makakapag-predict ng cheating behaviors. So just to give you an idea, how are you going to answer this question? You need to quantify. You need to compute for the 4 variables here. Gagawin mong number yung income level, gagawin mong number yung marital satisfaction, yung availability of alternatives, pati na yung cheating behavior. Once you're able to quantify the 4 psychological variables, you will run it statistically. Gagamit ka na ng software. A software that can run multiple regression. Yan, Statistica, SPSS. Diba? Those softwares will help you analyze quantitatively those 4 variables that you are studying. But in a qualitative question, magiging iba ang tunog eh. 'Di ba? Pag qualitative, ito naman yan. Why does someone begin to think of cheating in a relationship when his or her partner's income level is insufficient? Bakit kapag na-sense mo na yung partner mo maliit ang sweldo, bakit ka nakakaisip na mag-cheat? Anong meron? Anong naiisip mo? Or ano yung ina-anticipate mo? Bakit ka mag-cheat kapag maliit yung sweldo ng partner mo? Ano bang interpretation mo doon sa pagiging maliit ng sweldo ng partner mo? What's with that? What's with having a partner with low income that it motivates you to cheat in a relationship? You see? Now I'm sounding like a qualitative researcher. Now, I just want to clarify. Is there a war between qualitative and quantitative research in psychology? Kasi baka isipin nyo, the way I presented quali and quanti, it's like they are contradicting each other, no? Is there a war between the two methods? The answer is, nung unang panahon, meron. Di ba nga, no, nagkukulitan sila, no? Yung mga ibang psychologists gusto pa rin qualitative. Yung mga psychologists naman na gustong-gusto ng statistics, gusto nila quantitative lang, wag na raw mag-qualitative. At first, there's a war between quali and quanti. But what happened? As time went by, as we entered the age of modern psychology, and modern psychology includes us today, we slowly realized that there should not be a war between quanti and quali. Bakit? Pareho pala natin silang kailangan. Whether that's a quantitative research or a qualitative research, it can still help us learn more something about the human mind. Quanti man yan or qualitative, makakatulong pa rin yan sa pagpapaintindi sa atin how the mind works. 'Di ba? Sabi ko nga kanina, may positivism. As time went by, nagkaroon naman tayo ng social constructivism. Actually, social constructivism, sorry, nabulol ako. Constructivism, it's actually a response to positivism. Ang sinasabi na basically ng social constructivism, kapag puro numero na lang ang pagtingin natin sa mundo, ang pagtingin natin sa isip ng tao, magiging masyado tayong mababaw. 'Di ba? Although numbers are good, it can help us see patterns in human behaviors, but there are deeper reasons why those numbers are observed in the first place. Yes, we saw those numbers. Yes, we have these statistics. And it's interesting. And it enriches us in our understanding of the human mind. But, kulang yan. Diba? Yes, we have these numbers, but why? Why did we have those numbers in the first place? Saan nanggaling yung numbers na yon? What can explain why we see these numbers? Halimbawa dito, di ba sabi ko, going back to the ice cream example, only 1 in 30 take the free ice cream. That's quantitative. Right? Pero, gawin mong qualitative. Why did this one person took the ice cream? Bakit niya kinuha yung ice cream? Anong iniisip niya? Paano siya mag-isip? Bakit niya kinuha yung ice cream? Or, you can focus on the 29. Who did not take the ice cream? Why did the 29 did not take the ice cream? Anong iniisip nila? Now, what's the difference between someone who would take the ice cream for free and someone who will not take the ice cream for free? In what way do they see that situation? I'm sure they see the situation differently. Kasi magkaiba sila ng behaviors na ginawa eh. 'Di ba? Yung isa kumuha, yung 29 hindi. But what's the difference? What will make someone take a free ice cream and what will make some people not take a free ice cream? There you go, 'di ba? So mas lumalim ngayon yung pagkakaintindi natin sa psychological phenomenon na ito. Hindi lang tayo nagstay dun sa number, 1 in 30 took the free ice cream. But why? What motivates people to take or not to take a free ice cream? See? That's why, ang point ko lang dito, quantitative research and qualitative research in psychology, they complement each other. Hindi sila nag-aaway. In modern day psychology, they complement each other. They contribute to the knowledge about the human mind. May contribution si quanti, may contribution si quali. There is no approach that is better than the other. Huwag nyo silang pagsasabungin. Mas maganda ang quanti kumpara sa quali. No. That's a wrong way to do it. Both have something to contribute to our knowledge about how the mind works. Again, in quantitative, paulit-ulit na ako dito pero para maintindihan nyo, in quantitative, the goal is we see the patterns of the mind. we discover the patterns of the mind through the numbers. In qualitative, the goal is to describe, to explain why you see those patterns. Again, you apply that in the psychology of infidelity. Anong sabi ng Quanti? Wives are more likely to cheat when their husbands have low income. Quantitative observation yan. Okay? It's good to know. It's good to know that wives more likely to cheat in their husbands who have low income. Diba? Nakita natin yung pattern na yun. But a deeper question is, I can explain, or wives think of cheating their low-income husbands because, yung qualitative naman yung magpapaliwanag doon sa pattern na nakita natin sa Quanti. So, Quanti presents to you the pattern, qualitative will explain to you why that pattern existed in the first place. They are complement to each other. In closing, this is the last message I want you to learn for this lesson. No? Remember this: the design of your research must be determined by your research question. You will use this idea later on as you plan your research topic. No? Huwag kayo magsisimula sa method. 'Di ba yung pipili kayo, gusto ko quali or gusto ko quanti. And then from there, iisip ka ng tanong na quali, iisip ka ng tanong na quanti. That's not the way to do research. You start with a question, a psychological question that you are really interested to answer. Doon ka magsisimula, wag mo munang isipin kung magkakwali ka or magkakwanti. Kung ano man yung tanong that really interests you as a psych major, you start there. And then, the method will adjust to your topic. Okay? So don't start with whether you want quali or quanti. You start with the research question that you are sincerely curious about. So after this video, ang gusto kong gawin ninyo is to master the skills. Master the following skills. Number 1, gusto ko ma-master nyo yung skill na alam nyo if a research is a quantitative or a qualitative research. And number 2, gusto ko rin ma-master ninyo, dapat marunong na kayo mag-match, no? Kung ano yung mga tanong na pang quantitative, ano yung mga tanong na pang qualitative. Maliwanag? So, the post-lecture task that I am going to upload will help you master these 2 skills. So, I hope you learned something today. Again, the most important thing that you need to learn today is the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research, and quantitative and qualitative research, they complement each other. Thank you for listening, and God